Hi, everyone. I know you all know David. I am Anne McCready Heinen, and I'm the host this week for Weekly Dharma Gathering. Um, and tonight's session is Encountering Basic Goodness Part 8. Some reflections led by David, and we'll be including guided meditation, Dharma talk, and some discussion afterward. And if you've been here before, I know you know that tonight's session is going to be recorded. So if you prefer not to be seen, just you can turn off your video. And just I'll mention now and later, if you do ask a question, we record that as well. And if you have a question during the the guided instruction, you can feel free to enter that in the chat box, and then it can be addressed during the discussion period. And then the recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via either the purchase products on your Venmo Weekly Dharma Gathering account, and you can receive an email notification once it's posted. You can also access it a la carte if you don't have an account up and running. But just to go ahead and introduce David. David Perrin is a meditation mentor and friend to students, trainees, and fellow instructors. He's a collaborator, syncretist, so intriguing, facilitator of Circle in its myriad forms. David articulates the multiplicity of meaning encompassed by modern practice of mindfulness. As a creative arts therapist, social venture business co-owner, philanthropist, partner, and father, David is passionate about infusing all locations with the mindfulness 3.0 of our time. Director of Mindful Teacher Training, original head teacher of Mindful Greenwich Village, and co-founder of Mindful Ed school-based program, David co-created the Mindful Certificate and Training Program with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. And mindfulness that is beyond binary, celebrating multiplicity and intersectionality, imbued with justice and anti-oppression, is the mindfulness for all of us. So, David, I will hand it over to you. And I'm going to go ahead and spotlight David's video. If you'd like to switch back to gallery view after that, you are welcome to do so, or just leaving it here in speaker view. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks so much for your service, for being here and holding the space. It's an important role and not to be overlooked. And I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by that in a second. Hi, everybody. Wonderful to see you, Jeffrey, Ainsley, Mark, Mr. Rob Lay, Gail, and Anne. So good to be with you all for this final class of this series. Welcome to everybody who's going to be tuning in at a later date to watch the recording. I put out a little bit of a special call to some of my longtime friends, and so glad that some of you were able to make it tonight. This is it's an important class for me, an important occasion, because Shantae and myself were dreaming this up many moons ago, and we started this process in September. And so over the span of almost 5 months and these 8 classes, we've covered a lot of material. And so I'm gonna go back over some of what we've covered. Some of you have been here quite regularly, and some of you maybe are, if you're watching the recording, it might be the first time you're here for the last class, which is great. But we'll talk more. First, we're gonna get into some meditation. And what I was thinking about was I've been having some conversations with folks in the meditation community and outside of it. And, there's some sense, I don't know if any of you have this, that as much as, I mean, the way that I'm feeling is that as much as the blinders are on and the protective mask has been on, and all of the ways in which we've been protecting ourselves and others through these safety precautions and limitations and distancing, um, there's also maybe a little bit of a glimmer. There's a little bit of hopefully some cracks in the armor, that maybe some of us are getting a taste of what it will be like to continue to move through, maybe not ever entirely past what we've been living through with the pandemic, but moving through it such as it might be that we can uh, imagine gathering in person more. And so I want to welcome you into this particular meditation session with a visualization of perhaps where the place of practice, because I know you all are practitioners. And I know, at least for most of you, that there was, at a certain point in time, there was a home, a practice home for you. And so, whatever your relationship to that space is now, if there was ever a time in which you can picture in your mind's eye as you enter into this meditation, for me, it was 22nd Street in Manhattan. It was the long running Shambhala Meditation Center of New York. And every Tuesday night, we would have an open house, which had the name Weekly Dharma Gathering. And that was this evening. It was unlike any other time in the week of the center, because people came from all different locations. Normally in the other days of the center, people were they were coming for, even if they were relatively new, they were coming for a program, something specific. But this was this like wide open invitation for people of all different walks to enter in, to be led in meditation, and then to have a talk and have a Q&A after that. Those Tuesday nights were also the source for the podcast, the Meditation in the City podcast, that we had for many years. And I think actually they've recently re-envisioned it and brought it back. And myself and many other teachers contributed to that. It was a rotating cast of different teachers, and the topics were always different every week, and the audiences were always different, and the questions were always different. It was a very alive space, actually. And so it is with mixed feelings that I imagine and invoke that in-person space where we many of us know that feeling of maybe walking into a meditation hall, a shrine room, a place of practice, and there's all different feelings. We feel attracted by some things and some people. We feel repelled by some things and some people. A lot of it is neutral to us, but it is an alive and dynamic space. And it is a space where we go through a series of particularly coming out of the Shambhala tradition, there's like a kind of protocol to the evening, right? And that's why I was saying to Anne, it's the role of hosting is really important, because how we feel held by the person who is the host goes so far in opening our minds to be able to receive whatever the speaker is going to share and whatever the topic of the evening is going to be, right? So we're hosted, we feel welcomed, we settle into our seat. And this, now what we'll enter into is our period of meditation, which again is also fertilizing the mind, right? Is getting the mind ready to receive something. Tonight, we're going to practice what I've been referring to as the level 1 technique, which also comes out of the Shambhala tradition, which is this emphasis on the out breath. So even if this is not something you've been practicing regularly, or if you've been coming to these classes, watching these recordings, maybe you've been trying it out a little bit. I've been experimenting with it more in my practice. I think it's a very, very profound way to practice shamatha, peaceful abiding. So let's work with that tonight, and then we can get into some more discussion and sharing about it. So I won't say too much about finding our seat. Many of you are quite adept at that, other than to say that we're doing it yet again, which means we can take that with the freshness of the first time of really feeling the substance of our body being supported, so we can give the substance and weight of the body to whatever is supporting us. Shoulders moving away from the ears, hands are relaxed in the lap. It's always okay to gently feel how the sits bones create that foundation, and then the spine rises up. So this so elegant and mysterious relationship between the force of gravity and the life force that runs up the spine. Maybe taking a moment to tune into how is it that those two forces juxtaposed can create this very tall, open, strong back. Vessel for the breathing. Not tuning senses out, but integrating into this field of our awareness. So that as we give a special emphasis or consideration to the breath going out, which in some senses we don't work too hard to do, but we open up to the field of our awareness, which knows that space is around us, is tuned into space. Using the resting on and mindfulness of the out breath to be kind of that connection in our consciousness. So I am here, spaces around me. Out breath is that connection, or even sutra, if you will, connecting, knitting together consciousness of posture, awareness of space, and the out breath dissolves. And so noticing the movement of the mind is merely evidence of this conscious awareness. We're mixing mind with space, which means that the thoughts arise rather than be lost in just the consciousness of mental thinking. Just the awareness of where the mind is. We bring that right back out to dissolving the out breath into space around us. And so, again, noticing where the mind is. If it's time to begin again, even just one, two, or three times, really bringing sort of special attention to that fullness of the breathing out. Breath goes all the way out, and there's just a space for a moment. Kind of letting go of the breath, letting go of mental chatter. Easeful suspension in space. Next breath out. So in a moment, I'll ring a bell, just like the sound of the bell, the feeling of the out breath going out, following that sound all the way to its completion. And with that, we regather our attention in our space here. And for me, just in this post meditation, this special time right after practice, feeling whatever, in whatever way I've been tenderized. So there's can be a tendency to evaluate how that was, what was good, bad, what went well or not. And then just dropping back into a little bit the quality of how the mind body may have been tenderized by whatever the practice is, in this case that out breath practice. So context is important, and how things progress in any given activity that we undertake, the intention and thoughtfulness that goes into the sequence of that, right? The progression of that, the beginning, middle, and end of that is something that in my training as I get older, and in my training, I have more and more an appreciation for the ways in which the environment matters, the timing matters, the way that we prepare our minds and come into a situation really matters. And maybe especially so since we live in a time when there are just increasingly such a vast plethora of genuine wisdom teachings that are available at the touch of a finger. And I know that's cliche, and I only invoke that cliche to say that it may be, the realization of those teachings the difference may be context. It may be the situation in which we receive and begin to integrate. Um, it may be the main difference of how those things take root or don't. And so I want to talk tonight about, as I mentioned earlier, about what it means to be here together for this 8th and final class of this series. And I've mentioned this a number of times in the different classes that I've led, which is that we put a fair amount of thought into the sequence of what we would teach when, um, and how things would flow and what we wanted to present. Because in some ways we were using, as I've mentioned before, the Shambhala training weekend, the first weekend of Shambhala training as the model. And so we kind of deconstructed that weekend and took different themes from that weekend, particularly of the talks. So traditionally there were three main talks over the course of that weekend. There was a sitting, but there was a Friday night talk, a Saturday talk, and then a Sunday talk, or a second Saturday talk. And so the themes of those talks corresponded to what we did here. First one being basic goodness, introduction of basic goodness. A talk on freedom from obstacles, corresponding to the freedom and liberation talk that Shantae gave just last week. A talk on joy as being a hallmark of progress along the path. We gave special emphasis, and I want to talk a little bit in review tonight, to the three gates of body, speech, and mind as ways to kind of think about the context setting, right? Like that meditation is in some ways we might say that meditation and doing the practice of the out breath practice is this way of having an experiential relationship with the teachings on basic goodness. That's how that is the it's the mechanism, it's the context, it's the embodiment of what, when we talk about basic goodness, there's words to use and it's important to convey that in language, but how does each one of us experience that, particularly in a meditation, in a setting of meditation? And so what I've been thinking about in the this notion of the sequence of all these particular parts is the importance of this arising, abiding, and dissipating. That everything that exists, that comes together, all compounded phenomenon, to use fancy language, everything that comes together, that arises, will fall apart, will cease to be at some point. And so it's in some ways it's the most like fundamental logic that we have. It's we can look to nature and the turning of the seasons, right? It's the most easy to overlook. It's one of the maybe simplest concepts to intellectualize, and one of the easiest ones to overlook. And I'll give you an example of that. I've really been thinking about new beginnings, and as I've shared with, I think here, Shantae mentioned it last week as well. For me, just before the pandemic started, this planned move to Lexington, Kentucky, leaving New York after 20 years, we had planned to do it before the pandemic, but the pandemic sped it up. And so we left quite suddenly in the spring 2 years ago, or winter still it was. And, of course, all of our lives were upended by this. And now that I've been in this new location for almost a couple years and been through, as so funny, Shantae saying, we're entering junior year of COVID. that like, you know, having had, that there's some ground under my feet now, right? Some perspective. And I'm really feeling in my life the ways in which I have not completed certain cycles. I've not had closure around certain cycles of my life. And two main areas of that. One of which is I just I just discovered this this week, essentially, in my rest and contemplation on Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. I was wasn't feeling so great. I was feeling kind of depressed and down, and some of it had to do with, as I really entered into that, some of it had to do with a recognition that I was feeling some tension and some uneasiness, and just like even lack of skillfulness with, particularly with my children. My children are Reese is 15 and a half. Bowden will be 13 in the summer, and June will be 11. Um, so, when we left New York, we lived in the same place their whole life in New York City on 12th Street in Manhattan. And when we left, and when again we knew we were leaving, but when we suddenly had to leave and we had to say the sudden goodbye to this childhood home, and a home that Anne and I lived in almost 20 years, there was something that didn't close. And part of that, what I was just realizing the other day was, um, and this maybe couldn't have closed even when we left New York, but has been very gently closing since, is just them being out of their childhood, right? None of them are children anymore. They're all teens or preteens. And that is a really big transition. And it's big for me because those childhood years are they're very, very precious time. They're very hands-on, they're very tactile, they're very engaging, they're very, like, you're always on with the kids whether you want to be or you don't. um, and there's something that gets forged there in the bond between parent and child that, for me, was just about showing up and being, getting up early every single day, even if you wanted to sleep in. My kids sleep till 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning now. And there's this way in which they don't need what they did as children. They need other things, but they have grown up and they are more self-sufficient than they were. And they're not interested in the same things that they were as kids. And yet I'm the one that's holding on to them being kids. And so finding a way to bring some ritual and closing to commemorate and to honor the experience of what that part of their life was, so that, because actually they're moving on. They're actually good. Like, they've adopted to this new place that they live in. They have friends. They're doing well. I'm the one who, in some senses, is still back. I'm still in a time that I need to find a way to, I've come to realize, like, I need to find a way to bring some ritual to that closure so that I can move on with them in this time that they're going to be in. Similarly with the Shambhala community, and I won't say as much about this, but I have known actually for a while that um, after everything that happened in 2018 and the credible stories of sexual assault and all the other ways that there had been harm that had been perpetrated over the course of throughout Shambhala history, but came out in this very palpable way during that whole year of 2018 and after that. And as difficult an experience that was, and all the different ways, riding the ups and downs that I've been on, there's a way in which I still have not had closure with that period of time, with my participation in that specific community, with that specific teacher. And I've even been told it's important to, have some rituals, have some closure around that. And there's a way in which I have realized that I haven't done that for myself. And so the experience is being in kind of a limbo, ever so subtly. Even if I think, I've moved on, I'm doing different things, different projects, I'm spending time with different people, I'm not going to a Shambhala center, I'm not taking Shambhala classes, whatever it happens to be, there's still a way in which I have been in limbo. And there will always be a way in which I will be very mixed. There will be lots of feelings around that time. But to not close it has an effect, is what I'm, contemplating and suggesting. And so I bring all this up to say, we're going to figure out together tonight how to close this series, because that's important to do. But if we go back to the very beginning, the origins of this class 5 months ago, we talked about this notion of encountering basic goodness. And encounter in this case, I think, means how we meet each other and how we meet ourselves. So, how we meet ourselves in the practice, how we meet each other. And we do that repeatedly. And in some senses, meditation, I think for those people who turn the corner of the initial phases of it and are able to stick with it, it's because there's something that's gratifying, maybe that joy that I was talking about before, that there's some joy that we derive, even if it's not easy to meet ourselves again and again, we derive some satisfaction out of being in that meditation space of formal practice and also off the cushion of like, oh yeah, I want to meet myself. That actually is how it's an activity, a pastime, a way of being eventually, for those of us who've done this for a while, that is the way that I want to live. In the early stages, it can be really hard, and people think, I have more thoughts than I ever did while I'm meditating, and my life, I can't believe some of the thoughts that I have, and I'm such a crazy person. All the rest of those things that we may still, some of us experience. I know I do sometimes on the cushion, but it's if it doesn't become something that someone is drawn into wanting to do, encounter themselves again and again, often the practice is dropped because it's too much, or it's hard and it doesn't feel good, and and frankly it's joyless. It doesn't have a quality of joy. And sometimes I've said to people, if meditation is not leading you towards joy through the exertion, then you should look for something else to do. Encountering basic goodness. So basic. One of the things that I find so interesting about the level 1 technique is that with that sense of the breath going out, we have like there's some self-awareness, right? There's some mindfulness of body, even mindfulness of mind, um, whatever we're feeling, what our body is feeling, like we're in tune with that. And then we encourage to let that go time and time again. So as we go out into space and realize, oh, there's all of this space around me, and I'm space, and this is space, and uh, the reference points sort of dissolve. The dissolving is not just the out breath, but it's the dissolving of these reference points. What happens at the vanishing point of observing ourselves and participating fully, like embodied participation in life. And I'm thinking that sounds maybe quite esoteric. But it's something that I am increasingly really fascinated by in my own practice, which is that I think it's important to pay attention to what's going on with ourselves, right? It's like important to locate ourselves. So um, one of the other things we did early on is we did a process of locating, and we used 3 questions. Many of you have heard me use the 3 questions of where am I, how am I doing, and why am I doing this? So finding a way to locate ourselves, just like now many of us are becoming more attuned to when we introduce ourselves or say where we're from, we speak the land and the name of the indigenous humans to the land that we're on. That, I would argue, is a way of it expands the dimension of how we locate ourselves. Because if we are not expanding that notion of where am I, like where am I coming from, both physically, but then also like what's going on with me. I have a stomach ache. I'm feeling really preoccupied. Uh, I I feel regretful of something that happened earlier. If we don't locate ourselves, then we will be probably spend a lot of the time in our contemplative or meditative practice dancing around something. We're gonna be going, we'll use it as a dance to get around something. And that's another way of talking about spiritual materialism, dancing around things that if we can locate them right from the beginning, if we can put kind of a needle or acupuncture there, then there's a possibility of releasing and flowing, right? So there can be some movement. We also talked about those concentric circles with gathering the mind. And if you don't remember those, again, going back to the very first class, and I talked about essentially it's the same thing, where am I and how am I doing? What am I noticing about my body, my speech, and my mind? So once we locate, then we have the possibility to abide. And I think most of you have heard the translation of shamatha, which is peaceful or calm abiding. One of the importances of talking about basic goodness, that the basic quality is it's fundamental, it's ineffable, it doesn't have any conditions to it, right? And so when I talk about that vanishing point of observing ourselves and then just being a full participant in our life, like that, there's no conditions at that point. That's just raw experience. It's very basic. It's not this compared to that. When we bring in the goodness of basic goodness, we're essentially, to my mind, we're talking about, for instance, the 3 inherent qualities or innate qualities to each one of us. And particularly, we talk about mind as being stable, clear, and having a certain strength and fortitude. Right. So in that, in the space of no condition and no reference points, what are we relying on? Because that's not just a free-for-all space. that is a space that is built on a foundation of every sentient being having this clear, stable, knowing, and strong mind. That is our birthright. And no doubt we get confused and led astray, and all sorts of contortions happen. But that is the raw material that we're working with. And so from that place of that raw material, we can, there's so many, uh, as few reference points as there are to basic. What does that mean? That also means that the reference points are endless. There is no limit to the various amalgamations of all of our ways of being. I was recently meeting with an astrologer, and I don't know how many of you are into or know much about astrology. I don't know that much about it. But one of the things he said, his name is Vontae Clark, and one of the things he said to me was that when he really deeply understood as a practitioner, I mean, he's a teacher and a reader, translator of astrology, but when he understood as a practitioner, he could see, he could really feel the resonance with how he experienced his life with what he read in that map. Because to me, astrology is really a map that we can look to as a particular a way of orienting ourselves, right? Locating ourselves in our own life, and characteristics and certain penchants we have and aversions and things we're good at and things we struggle at, and the chemistry we have with other people. It's all just a map. And when he could really clearly see himself in the map, it gave him permission to stop trying to be someone else than who he was, and who he experienced himself to be. And that is it's quite a provocative concept in a way, because uh, does that mean we are predestined? Does that mean emptiness isn't a real thing, right? Does that mean that um, we are limited to kind of our personality and our quirks and our characteristics? I don't think it means any of those things. I gave a talk on Weekly Dharma Gathering a while back, which was entitled Don't Drop Me. Storyline, it was like storyline and the story of our lives, something like that was the subtitle. And what essentially I was trying to get at was this notion that each one of us has a story, that our life as we live it is a story. In meditation, we often hear drop the storyline, right? The discursive thinking, the ways in which we get totally bound up in all of these concepts with our mind. Yes, it's appropriate to say, let go of that and dissolve into space or come back to the breath, whatever it might be. But the story is not something necessarily always to be dissolved. It's actually to be paid attention and lived into, because each one of us has a unique story. Each one of us is an expression and has a unique expression of the basic qualities of basic goodness, the thisness of life, the stability, clarity, and strength. We each have to express that somehow. It's not going to look the same for any two people. And it is, as Shantae has said a number of times, it is an embodied experience. It's completely embodied. Each one of us inhabits, we come from a certain location or set of locations. We have a body, and it expresses itself a certain way in the world. And we can talk in common ways about that as we have, focusing on body, speech, and mind. in this course, right? We took a class each for each one of those to look at them individually. And there's a common experience, right? There's a way we can talk about them commonly, but each one of them is going to express itself completely uniquely in in each one of our experience in our life, in our embodiment. So, for instance, when to review the subject of the body that Shante talked about, they talked about three specific domains, and I don't know if you remember it. If I was really mean, I would give you a pop quiz and say, what are the three domains of that Shante Paradigm Smalls taught on the body? And when I say them, you're going to be like, oh yeah, yeah, that right, yes. The first domain was the physical body. So one way of talking about that is, how do we feel at home in this corporeal thingamajig that sometimes we have pleasant sensations and sometimes we have painful sensations. That's just a very, blanket, simplistic way to put it. How do we feel at home in our bodies? Well, sometimes we feel good and sometimes we don't feel so good. Second domain, the energetic domain. So, of course, as it sounds, it's not material, and yet it becomes manifest. So Shantae talked about, and you can go back and listen to that talk, the different ways in which there's movement of the energy and there's obstruction. Sometimes we feel clear and sometimes we feel stuck. And how are we relating to that the energetics of the body? And then finally, the relational domain. So in my words, this is not Shantae's words, but in my words, every one of us is at the center of our world, right? Each one of us exists at the center of the universe. We are the center of the universe, and so is everybody else in this Zoom room. So how do we make sense of the fact that each one of us is the center and everyone else is the center of their world? And if we can begin to open up to that koan, we can start to ask questions of, like, very grounded questions, such as, how has the pandemic changed each one of us in social ways? Because it's been a radical departure from what we knew socially. And that has a lot to do with the body. And so if we enter through that gate of how the body and bodies encountering each other were changed by what we've been living through, then we will really begin to understand the importance of the body on that physical plane. Picking up on speech, same domains, right? So after Shantae talked about those, and then I applied them to speech. And so physically, how are we on voice? Those of you who've trained in any kind of vocal technique know what it means to be on voice as an actor or a singer. How are we making vibrations with our body? And then energetically, talking about the how of communication being just as important as what we're saying. So how we're saying is just important as what we're saying. Someone can say yes, and the energetic of that is no. And then finally, the relational domain of speech might refer to the fact that speech is always an expression of our mind, and that speech leads to action. So speech speech really, really matters. And we all know that intuitively, and we know that logically. And I would venture to say each one of us is learning all the time how our speech can affect any given person or situation, in good ways and harmful ways, overt or subtle ways. So the interesting thing, by the time that Shantae got to the mind class, and I don't know how many of you experienced that, but it was, again, I really encourage you to go back and watch it. But they, my experience of what was being conveyed was this notion of like, you know, being with the gate of the mind in our practice means we can practice anywhere. And both this last class on liberation and also that class on mind, Shante really talked about practice off the cushion and being with their mind in any given situation, whether it's out being in Prospect Park, whether it is cooking a meal, right? The one way of talking about it is like the 85,000, 84,000, whatever it is, dharmas, that there are so many myriad of ways to practice, and how we're being with our minds can be the way in which we discover that practice is everywhere. And it really, for me, what that talk did, what Shantae really reconnected me with some of my training within Shambhala, which was that all these forms that we have and all these different activities and post meditation, right? Each one of them can be considered a mindfulness and meditation practice if we approach it with that intention, and if we're holding our minds. One of the things is in the posture of meditation we're naturally suited to work with our minds because it's a very specific posture. But when we change that posture or we move off the cushion, it becomes a little bit more of maybe a challenge or invitation, depending on how you look at it, to see that as the meditation of cooking dinner or walking to the train or arranging some flowers or um, writing checks. My godfather used to do his check writing meditation. And when he was paying bills, and he would get his nicest pen and his nicest ink, and he would line them all up, and he would just, it was like, he would do his beautiful signature, and he derived this joy out of paying his checks. It was always, I was like, what's wrong with you? So I want to, before we open up for a little conversation and figure out how we want to close, I was really struck by a couple things that Shantae said, and this is a little bit of my just appreciation for Shantae as a co-teacher and a teacher generally and a human in the world. Just so much respect and love. And last week Shantae talked about liberation as power. So in this brilliant talk about liberation and freedom and the similarities and differences, arrived at this notion that being in a place of liberation for self and others was an empowerment. And what that got me contemplating was that we are liberated to be our most full selves. And I heard recently someone talking about finding our brilliance in the world, each one of us finding the brilliance that we have to share with the world. It was reflected this past Monday. The good Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock addressed Lexington, Kentucky in the MLK celebration, and it was an amazing speech that he gave. And it was really one of the touchstones of the speech was exactly this point, was like, what is your brilliance to offer, and that's what the world. Ask not what the world needs, but what energizes you, what lights you up, what excites each one of us to be able to contribute. And so this empowerment of this liberation, right, of relating deeply to the basic goodness of ourselves and others and society, we are empowered to bring the brilliance of our own story, and also to heal the wound of to heal our wounds, to take responsibility to heal the wounds that we have incurred through this life, because each one of us has those wounds. So we're both healing and offering brilliance. Sometimes it can be in the just in the next moment. Sometimes those each need to happen in their own domain and in their own way. But I think that the integration we're going with, that what arises out of this practice is that they can be very closely aligned. Like, that it's possible for our healing of our wounds and our brilliance to be really close in the manifestation of our lives. Shante said once, I think it was in one of the earlier classes, they said, don't let anyone knock you off your path. Don't let anyone knock you off your path. And that's stuck with me this whole time, because in that statement is basically that it's my path, it's my unique path, and it's going to look different from anybody else's path. And also, like, that empowerment, right? That notion of, no, I'm not going to let anyone not only knock me off my path, but dictate what my path is, tell me whether that's the correct path or the not correct path, ridicule my path, pathologize my path, um, make my path out to be better than other people's path, whatever it is. And that's so easy to happen, easier than many of us would like to admit in this day and age. But hopefully through this course, there's been a little bit, in whatever way that you've been able to participate and hear these teachings, there's been a little bit of a way in which feeling the power of each one of your own path is so vital for moving forward. So with that, I want to leave a little time for any reflection or questions, and then just plant the seed that, before we go, I want to find some way that we can each offer in our contribution to close this space, this series, this class. But before we do that, I'm going to open the space and see if there's anything that anyone wants to share, feels moved to share, ask about.
And as you may know, you're welcome to use the chat function, or you can also use the raise hand, or just the small group.
Hi, thank you so much. I really just want to offer gratitude for the teachings tonight and for the whole course. I've had the great privilege of being in many of the live Zoom rooms, and it's been very beneficial. Yeah, no, I think I have to offer is I'm very practical and very simple. I show up to be reminded, right? When we talk about basic goodness, it's inherent in all of us. But by getting on my cushion and practicing meditation, I can right size myself and I can come into alignment, like we did in the exercise at the beginning of this group. So I'm capable of equanimity and real listening, right? Without all the filter and all the story. And yeah, this course has been wonderful. It's, all these teachings have been around for thousands of years. We're not discovering anything new. We're just being reminded of what we already know, in my experience. And thank you for being the vehicle, and for everyone who's created the safe space, right, to be still and to be reminded, because it's beneficial in the space, but it's also beneficial in my practice when I'm not in this space, and the ripple effect, right, that when I step out into the world, the seeds planted here, they mature in their own space and in their own time, and I know I benefit, and I'm less likely to act like an asshole if I get on my cushion a couple times a day. I'm more likely to show up with equanimity and kindness, and yeah, that's profound enough for me. I hope we're moving away from the patriarchy and the guru cult of the past. I hope that's what we're witnessing in our lifetimes now. Um, the cult of personality, and all the Orientalism, and the esoteric, the strange man from the East who leads the meditation group. It's in my humble opinion, archaic and unnecessary, right? Let's get back to the basics. Let's be more mindful, be more kind, right? Remember our basic goodness. When I'm able to do that and practice those principles, yeah, that's profound. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
your teachings, and Shante as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah, no, you've been such a wonderful participant in these, in all of these sessions, and your participation, I would say, has helped create that safe space and that safe container. So I want to just reflect that back to you. And um, uh, I agree that I think we're moving into a new time and a new way of transmitting, and something that has a lot of power without all the baggage. And I'm noticing that in various communities that I'm participating in. And it's also what led me to bring forward this notion of closure, because I think for me, like, I'm just admitting that there's a way in which I was leaving open some way, even as much as I might consciously not want to, like, well, maybe there's some way the guru will come save me, or there's some way that, the patriarchy will change so that everything works out. And it's just not, it ain't happening. And I recognize for myself that, doing some of that work around closing, even in my own mind, closing out on that so that something else can arise, is, I just wanted to bring that forward to share in the way that is seeming useful to me. And it's a work in progress. It's not like I've accomplished it, but it's just to say that I'm really feeling what you're saying, and a lot of agreeance there, and appreciation for this space as well, because I think it's what's bridging us from this old way of being into a new way of experiencing the Dharma. So thank you. Others, anybody else want to share or offer into the space?
Hi, David. Thanks so much for all this teaching. It's funny, I've been thinking about something Shante said last week too, which was about sort of formlessness, the formlessness of the practice. And I'm really challenged by that in some ways, because I just feel like my whole life is so formless right now. And there was for all of the problems, which I was only vaguely aware of because I was really a beginner at Shambhala, but for all of the problems with Shambhala, there was something about walking in, you sort of conjured it earlier, and just walking into that container. And it wasn't so much about a guru, it was just everybody coming together in that old room, and you could just feel, the energetic presence of just everybody who was there. I don't know if you have advice about just, creating a little form even within this kind of open-ended life that we're living, where this is the container, this electronic device.
Yeah.
Where I have
Yeah.
to toggle between spotlighting you and then coming back to see everybody.
Yes. 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 Thank you. And thank you for bringing that forward, Ainsley. And thank you for being here. Similarly to what I was just saying, it feels important for me to bring forward this notion that each one of us, the story of our practice is different. And, some of you here, we have, a mentor-mentee spiritual friendship relationship. And so I can speak with some experience and somewhat directly to say that, your what you need is going to be different from what other people need. And it is true and so important to hear Shantae speak about the formlessness quality of things. And also, and one of the things that is so powerful about their teachings is it's both universal and they're so genuine with what, they share. Like, this is what's going on for me in my practice. And my question to them last week in terms of form was exactly what you're saying. Well, what about, these forms that actually really serve a purpose, and they're important, whether they're rituals or they're ways of gathering together, or they're just what I was trying to invoke earlier, which is like creating this context for practice, because it's important. Sometimes we need that support, whether through other people or forms or things or shrines or ringing bells or whatever it is. It helps to orient the mind in such a way that then in the more formless moments, it occurs to us. Shantae is very deeply practiced. So there's a way in which, like, for them, what I hear in that is like, okay, there's a way in which all of the work of the forms and everything they've done show up in this moment of standing by the reservoir right? Like that, it's like, that's a real moment of practice for them. And for some of us that may occur sometimes, but a lot of times we might just be trying to like get from A to B. And so we bring, and so both are important, right? And I want to encourage all of us to, as I was saying before, in whatever way there's little cracks in the armor going on, and you can begin to imagine, how am I going to be with other people or receiving teachings in embodied ways? How do I envision that for myself? So does that look like, where are the local people that I might feel like safe to practice with, to pod up with? What is the book group that I can join, whether online or maybe potentially in person, that where, if being with other people and Sangha and community is an important context for us to receive the teachings and to integrate the teachings, figuring out ways to do that. Retreats, what's going to start to happen is there will be more retreats. I was supposed to co-lead a retreat in December. I didn't actually get to do that, but the retreat happened. And the stories that are coming out of that retreat are just amazing, of what people, when they were socially distanced and with masks and all the precautions, but what it meant for people to come back into the space together. And that retreat with the Presence Collective was led very differently from some other more traditional retreats, which are, again, people are responding to. It doesn't have to be someone dictating that I'm sitting for 12 hours a day and they're going to tell me what every move that I'm making every half an hour. Sometimes there's a place for that form, but that is the evolution. And sometimes what Jeffrey was talking about, the evolution into new ways of practicing and receiving the Dharma and being with the Dharma. Those things are going to start to percolate more and more. And so what it does require from our point of view, I think, is to just let in the imagination, just let in if I imagine myself feeling really good about my practice in a certain situation, what does that feel like to me? And if it was the New York Shambhala Center, that's not going to re-arise, but we have to take some of the specific elements of that and then creatively, do like a mental mashup to be like, oh, okay, maybe it is getting myself on a retreat, or maybe it is supplicating a teacher to teach on something, or maybe it is a book group with my fellow Sangha members, or maybe it is more walking meditation. Again, something Jeffrey said, I'm doing a lot of walking meditation. It's like, that's it, but we have to have an imagination for that before it can manifest. And we'll talk more, right, Ainsley?
Yes.
Okay.
Might jump in with some thoughts and gratitude. I appreciate bringing up closure, and I appreciate that kind of bringing up the context of the Shambhala Center. I've been thinking a lot. I just finished Mingyur Rinpoche's book, In Love with the World, where he focuses a lot on death, and I think that in March I did what's called a death lodge, where it's an indigenous practice where you kind of, it's crossing a threshold and recognizing the death of one thing and the birth of new things. And I think it's interesting, the timing of this worked out just perfectly for me, so that I do feel like I can let go of Shambhala. That happened to me during this time. And that the context, like, for example, I enjoyed Shantae's, one thing I took away was Shantae's view on Sangha was really, described it as kind of sharing practice with people. And it made it clear to me that, like, it helped me to think about what Sangha means and who are these people that I share, like, when I can ask that question when I'm in Sangha or in a group and be like, well, I do share practice with these people. And I feel like this was a shared practice over these 8 classes. And it acted as a container for a lot of other things that I was thinking about, which included things like closure and space. And then I think, yeah, so I think that sorry, losing my glasses. I really appreciate, I think that this provided a lot of that space, and I really enjoyed the literal, the small group that has gotten together, and to hear those teachings again, recontextualized. They're fresher, and I'm hearing them also as I'm, like, studying a lot of other things, and feeling that joy that you're talking about, that it's like everything is falling into place, it feels like, a lot of times, although I'm also completely groundless and lost. So I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. And Mark, one of the things about your practice that I really appreciate, and I think comes through in what you're just sharing here, is that you, as I think all of us here, and you have your own embodiment of and intersectionality is not the word I'm looking for. It has something to do with the moving between the different sanghas and the different communities that represent aspects of what is aspects of each one of our story. And this is something that I think is a real koan. It's a real conundrum. You and I know, have talked about this, and hopefully we'll talk about it more, but is this notion of, what does it mean when there's no one community that holds all the pieces of like, and has kind of expresses or lives into the value that I have of all the different things that I value, right? That there's no one place I'm going to find all of that equally. And so while I do believe that there is a certain value of, like, committing to other humans in community and showing up through thick and thin, good and bad, things we like, things we don't like, I do think that there's value in that. I also think we're really in the great experimentation for moving across and through these different spaces, and in some ways thinking about Sangha as not just one group of people, but all of the people in our world, in our particular universe. And that's, again, why I'm trying to communicate around, like, that each one of our story is important, and each one of us is the center of our world. So how do we navigate that in that I'm the center of my world and I have my story and I have all my different sanghas and communities, and so do you. Because we need to figure out a way that works, rather than that's we feel like it's not enough, or we're held back by it, or we're too scattered, or we feel kind of lost amongst that, because it's the new reality. It's not going away. It's not going to stop that each one of us is participating in all these different communities. So that's actually probably because it is time to close. I think that's a good way to do it. And so I just had the idea. You all have sparked the. If we had more time, I would love to do another round of bringing everyone's voice into the space. But I think to honor your all's time and the time boundary of this class, what I'd like to do, I'm going to bring back the bell, because that feels like a nice way to ritualize some closure, right? So here's the little bell, a little ringer. So here's what I'll just make the invitation to do, which is we'll do 3 bells. And on the first bell, we can the invitation of the prompt will be to bring forward like whatever feeling, and it can be a word, it can be a feeling, just some sense of appreciation for this space that we have shared. And again, even if you've only been here just today for this class, or if you're watching this recording, whatever you want to summon, and there'll be some nice space between the bells, summon by way of appreciation. The second bell will be to just let that marinate, right? Like just to enjoy that and have the joy of it, whatever it might be. And then the third bell will be to let it go. And so you might envision that going out into the world, reaching another person, another human, another community. But you know, at the end of that will be really like the end of the out breath. So you let it go, you give it away, in whatever way that suits you, and then a few breaths of just letting it fully rest and fully dissolve. Okay, so 3 bells. Give us all a moment to come into our own experience, our own bodies, hearts, and minds. And here's the first bell. I'm letting it fully rest. With perhaps a few good breaths in and out. Okay, friends. I know Anne has a few words for us before we go, but I want to just thank you from the bottom and the top and every side. I hope to be with you all in a space like this soon, and I'm sending lots of warm wishes to all of your loved ones. May everyone be safe, and may we continue, each one of us, the story of our own journey.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you, everyone, for joining tonight's online Dharma gathering. And next week's will be from Ashley Dinges. I'm pronouncing her name correctly, of how the Buddha Dharma helped me decolonize my heart. And welcome to consider becoming a subscriber if you are not already. And also feel free to find Weekly Dharma gathering on social media, Instagram, Facebook. And thank you so much again for being here tonight. Thanks, David.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
so much, David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
David.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
Rob. Thank you, Gail. Bye.